So hello and welcome. I'm Brandy and I work here at the Chesley Branch of the Bruce County Public Library, and today we're really pleased to have Cindy Matthews here with us. Cindy has just published her first book, Took You So Long, which is published by Porcupine's Quill in Erin, Ontario. And Cindy is a local author, so we're really excited. One of our patrons was just here for book club just ahead of our talk today, so we're excited to have Cindy here. So we're doing a recording today. We're sharing this on YouTube, and we're amidst a live group here in the Chesley Branch, so we're really excited. So just a little introduction about Cindy. Cindy is the only child of parents who immigrated from Eastern Europe after World War II. Born in Oakville Trafalgar Hospital, the original one, not the new one. Cindy grew up on a chicken farm next door to Ukrainian neighbors. When she was 9, her parents purchased and operated a hotel in Mitchell, and when she was in grade 9, they moved again, this time to near New Hamburg. A graduate of the University of Waterloo and Brock University, Cindy taught for Conestoga College, Waterloo Region District School Board, KW Counseling, and Queen's University. She became a specialist in special education and eventually was promoted to the role of Vice Principal of Special Education. Cindy is an active local volunteer. She has been a full-time creative visual art and writing since retirement from her Vice Principal role in 2012. And married to John since 1980. They have 3 adult children and many grandchildren, all 7 and under in age. She and John have lived in Bruce County full-time since retirement, and so, as I said, Took You So Long is Cindy's first book. So welcome, we're excited to have you.
Thank you so much. So as far as format, I'm going to read from the first 3 paragraphs of the first story in just a moment. Then Brandy has some prepared questions that she's going to offer me to answer. Then I'm going to read from another story, but just a few paragraphs or a page or 2. Then you have an opportunity, audience, to ask your questions. They might be specific questions about something that you've read if you have already acquired a copy, or they could be general questions. I'm game for pretty much anything. Then we'll finish up with me reading a final excerpt from another story. And then if anyone wants to purchase a copy for a loved one or themselves or their whole block at home, I'm here. I'm here for the signing and all of that. All right, so that's our format. So I'll get started. The first 3 paragraphs is coming from The Hole, the first story in the collection. Catherine Maxwell tumbled into a hole right after lunch. It wasn't much of a lunch. Just reheated sausage, a slice of day-old bread, and half a can of beer left over from the night before. A good enough feed to put a kick in her step. All morning, she'd had her sights set on sinking her teeth into something better than leftovers, something shamelessly succulent. For weeks, she'd been obsessing about getting her hands on morels. The fungi predictably sprang forth after the long winter, under a grove of bur oaks in the far corner of her 10-acre property. The spot was shady and moist with loamy soil. Ideal conditions for morels. Catherine hated paying good money at the farmer's market for something she could get in her own fields for free. And besides, hers were much fresher. If she picked the morels when they were small and young, there was nothing like them. Sautéed in butter and crushed garlic, the nutty, meaty flavor titillated the taste buds. The distinctive honeycomb ridges, a French tickler of pits and caps, offered sensual delight. True, a morel was a pain to clean, with its hollow exterior of irregular bumpy holes and ridges, but Morcella, with its unique anatomical perfection, guaranteed a gustatory climax without the mess and aggravation of sex. That's the first reading.
Really nice, Cindy. There's so much going on in those first few paragraphs, right?
That's what I was hoping.
Yes, right? Really grab. And was it difficult to choose the story that would be first in the collection?
That was something that the publisher and I did together. So I worked with their editor is Stephanie, and Ordering is really important, especially in a collection, to get it, the order right. So you want to draw the reader in right away with that first sentence, and we really thought that that story did that. It's a sentence that's strong, it's short, it's simple, but you already, I hope, want to know more about this Catherine who's in a hole, right? You really want to know why she's in a hole. You want to know who she is, what's she about, what makes her tick. So that's why we started with that.
Okay, yeah, great choice.
Thanks.
Were you always a writer?
Well, no. From the bio, you know that I've done other things. I certainly have done a lot of writing in my job, but not fiction, right? So I didn't really start doing fiction until about 2 years before retirement. I was actually a reviewer for the KW Record. That was another little gig that I did, volunteer. And I liked short fiction collections. That was my favorite thing to review, and I thought, I need to do this. I need to start writing. So someone sent me a notice about a potential contest that I should go into, and it was for an organization that was offering prizes. I don't know, I think one was a small money prize and two other things, maybe a book, and one was a purse. I won the purse. I came in third in this contest that I competed in. And I had written my story as a letter to a person who was suffering from Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. That was the organization that was running the contest. And coming in third was like, yes, I can do this, right? So that kind of gave me a bit of a boost. So was I always a writer? Not from the get-go, not as a kid growing up, that was for sure. My go-to was drawing, actually. So I used to collect morels, things that I could draw from our property where I grew up on the chicken farm. And we had a nice bush beside the property, and I'd go in there and collect twigs and meticulously draw all the details. But writing wasn't my go-to activity as an only child. My go-to activity was being outside playing and drawing. Hope that answers your question.
It does, yeah. So you touched on this a little bit about thinking, because you loved the short stories so much as you were reviewing them, that you thought that you could dive into those and try to write some yourself. And what is it about, or what inspired you to write short stories at this time in your life?
So I think what I like about it is I can explore different packages or holders or containers for the stories. So like I mentioned, the story that won or came in third in the contest, that particular form, writing a letter, is a style of how I wanted to approach that particular story. And there are three like that in this story. There's a blog, there's anyway, I'll let you buy the collection, you can find out. But I like the fact that I can explore different points of view, so I can tell some stories from first person point of view, I, or third person point of view, she, he, they, that type of thing. Sometimes I write from second person point of view, you. I tell a story about you. Again, very different. So I think if I were writing a novel, I wouldn't have that opportunity as readily as I had in 19 stories to tell them all in a little bit of a different way. That keeps this going for me. I like that challenge, and I have a short attention span. So writing a 10 or 12 page story suits my personality very, very well, because then I can go on to another project, leave that story to percolate, come back to it, revise it, and all that.
Excellent. Is there something that you're working on next that you can tell us a little bit about?
I can. I have a second set of stories out in the world. They are called, the collection is called The Roach Family and Other Stories. That's the working title. And I'm about 7 stories into a third collection, which is untitled. The second collection hasn't been picked up yet, but you can always be hopeful, right? Great. And I'm busy promoting, so I'm not as prolific a writer when I'm promoting, so I hope that when I take a few months off in the winter, not doing some book promoting, that I'll be able to pump out a few more stories. And that's really what I do, is I pump them out. I write longhand, and I write in one sitting. So if I write a 10 or 12 or 20 page story, it's in one sitting. Wow. And that's probably why I don't write novels, because I think that pace would be pretty tough for me. Yeah. Because then the rest of the week I wouldn't write. I would just take, I would write in my diary and things like that, but nothing productive.
Yeah. And is writing in your diary a big part of your process?
It is, because that's where I can experiment with ideas, right? That's where I can write, for example, gratitude, or things I regret, or like lists of things that are on my mind, or responses to what's going on in the world, or in the family, or in book club, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Did I say book club? Just joking. Inside joke.
So the title of Took You So Long, where did that come from? It was inspired by?
That's a great question. Took You So Long is one of the stories, and that's a really common thing to see in collections, that one of the stories becomes the title. But it has particular significance to me because the year I earned my first royalty check for a book is the same year that I earned my old age security pension. So it took you so long, to get a book out into the world. Like, this is my first, and it might be my only book, right, that's ever published by a publisher. So that's why I use that title. It took you so long.
You were talking a little bit about your writing process, which I think is probably, I don't know if it's unique. I haven't talked to a lot of other writers
Right.
Up close, but writing longhand and at one sitting. Do you ever get writer's block, or can you tell us about that?
I certainly have not been as prolific while promoting the book.
Sure.
So I was getting a little bit nervous about the fact that I hadn't written anything since late August, right about when the book came out. Interesting, right? So I did something about that. I just started writing, and I wrote the words, I remember, and then finished that sentence. And then I wrote another, I remember, and finished that sentence. And then before I knew it, I had about 5 or 6 pages and thought, one of these ideas has got to be a good starter for a story. And it's still a story that's under development, but at least I have a story that I've written between August and now. And actually this week I wrote another one. So yes, I deal with block like anyone does in the writing process, and I think that's mostly because, hello, come on in. That's mostly because it happens, and you just have to deal with it, right? It's like when I get blocks when I'm drawing and painting. I go through periods, ebbs and flows, ups and downs. It just happens. Yeah. And you just deal with it, and you don't try to cry about it too long. You just try to embrace it and get on with it. And the other thing that's important to do is to be reading. So I read every single day. I read professionally, so I read about craft of writing, and I get ideas from that. And then I read for research, and then I read for enjoyment, and I also read in the genre. So in this genre of short fiction, I think that's very important to be really familiar about what other people are doing, experiment sometimes with what they're doing as well, right? Maybe using their first sentence as a diary type of starter and see where it goes, right? So those are a few ideas.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about the editing process? I'm curious. So you've written shorthand or longhand. Do you then transcribe everything into a word processing software, and then how much editing time do you spend, or do you work with the editor right away?
Well, I do write longhand because I find I'm freest that way. I'm most creative. It means that it takes probably much longer than it would take if I were keying it in. And I usually let that writing sit for about a week because it's very precious for about 2 or 3 days, and then it's not as precious by the end of a week. Then I transcribe it, and I usually use an iPad, and I have a secondary keyboard that I use, and then I send it to my computer in my office. I like to sit at the island in our kitchen. It's a really nice spot for me to do that typing. And then I start editing. So what that means is I might print it out and move things around, or I might delete things, add things, get rid of 4,000 or 5,000 words, whatever the case may be, whatever it needs, right?
Yeah.
If I'm heading it to maybe to a contest, and the contest says 2,000 words is the maximum, I might have 5,000 words, and so I do really need to know what my story is about and shape it into the funnel, right? Into that fine point of the funnel and narrow it down. Some of my stories have had 20 versions. Not a lie. Some I think have even had 50 because they needed so much work. Sometimes I completely rewrite them. So maybe it was written in the first person, now it's written from the point of view of Catherine Maxwell, like in the first story. You know what I mean? So that's kind of my process. It takes forever. It's not something that you do if you don't like work.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to really like words and playing with words.
And is there, do you know the feeling of flow with your writing or your editing? I'm always curious about that process and what that feels like for other people sometimes.
As far as flow, I like doing the first draft a lot. I like when it kind of like I can't keep up with the pen ink coming out of onto the paper, but I almost like the editing as much, because it's a completely different thing that I've already got it. I've already got something down on paper, and so I can work with that. I can mold that bit of clay, so to speak, right? To use that analogy. So the first draft is usually garbage. I'm going to be honest, compared to what it looks like much later, because it's your first draft. It's your first kick at it, right? It's like the first time you make bread or a tough recipe. And it doesn't turn out, that's okay. It's a learning experience. Next time, you know to put the yeast in the right spot in the bread maker so it works better, or whatever it is, right? So that's how I deal with the flow of it.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Did you want to read a little bit more?
Sure.
We'll do a few more questions after.
You bet.
Great.
Audience, start thinking. Unfolding recipes. This is on page 57 if anyone's brought their book. I have an uncomplicated recipe for potato pancakes. It was my mother who taught it to me when I was young, even though my father always said he was the better cook. The potatoes came from the garden, from the small patch where my mother grew vegetables. I used to kneel on a kitchen chair and watch as she peeled potatoes with confident, steady hands. Then she guided each chunk of potato along the stainless steel box grater. The grater's sharp, raised surfaces could give you a nasty cut. I remember one time my mother was careless, and droplets of blood stained the fawn-colored potato mixture below, eventually turning it pinkish. "Sorry about that," she said, her voice soft and embarrassed as she studied the crimson mess in the center of the bowl. She whistled through the gap between her top teeth while trying to scoop out the contaminated bits with a long-handled wooden spoon. The directions were simple and clear. Once the grating was done, she dug a dollop of bacon grease out of the ceramic bowl she kept next to the stove. She scraped the hardened fat into a heated cast iron pan. She didn't refer to a recipe or use a measuring cup. She cooked by feel, relying on intuition and experience. While the fat melted, she cracked 2 eggs against the lip of the bowl and stirred them into the mixture she had already prepared. A pinch of salt, a handful, give or take, of finely diced onions, a few dashes of flour, a gentle squish of her fingers to combine the ingredients. Her actions seemed choreographed, her movements elegant and fluid. She was beautiful in her light blue slacks, her brunette hair gathered in a clasp at the nape of her neck, her hands dusted with flour and dripping with lumpy pancake batter. When the fat began to crackle, she plopped blobs of batter into the pan. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 discs the size of her palm. She always stopped at 5, for that was the right number of pancakes for one person to eat in a single sitting, no matter his or her age, size, or level of hunger. The sound of pancakes sizzling reminded me of my school's mammoth boiler, wheezing and sputtering in the halls and classrooms all winter long. The sizzles were so loud they drowned out the voices on the portable radio. Soon, puffs of smoke floated to the ceiling that had yellowed from years of cooking, and a delicious greasy smell filled the kitchen. As a child, my senses feasted on the sight, sound, and smell of my mother's potato pancakes. I could barely wait to pop one into my mouth. And we'll stop there.
Yeah, I'm ready for one of those. So descriptive. Every one of the senses, I think, touched on there too. Was that something you worked to do in those couple of paragraphs pretty consciously?
Yeah, very consciously. So I'm also a painter, so I want to paint with words, right?
Yes.
I want you to be there in the kitchen with me and the mother. I want you to experience it the way I'm experiencing it, and I want you to feel hungry. Yeah. Or to remember a time when you had a moment with a loved one cooking. I want you to be there. I want you to be present, right? And the way we do that is through sensory, right? Through lots of description and lots of detail. At least that's how I do it.
And thinking about that, are there some of your, throughout the stories, or maybe that story, is that something from your real life? Is there a family recipe that you're drawing on there in some of those experiences?
From the potato pancakes, yes. That is exactly the recipe that I grew up with. Mm-hmm. And it's the exact recipe I use to this day. Mm-hmm. And I still use a box grater, even though there are other ways to do things. I still am a purist about that. I don't use bacon fat.
Right.
For a lot of different reasons. One of the main reasons is we don't eat a ton of bacon in our house, but when we do, we save it for things like potato soup.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just have different recipes that I use, or different reasons for the bacon fat.
Yeah. And so is your mother there in that story, or is this a different character?
The mother is a bit contrived. So there are aspects of my mother in this story, and there are aspects of me in this story, but it's fiction.
Yeah. And would you say for the rest of the stories that there's a lot of fiction there, or is it really a blend of your own experiences and sort of observances?
I think for me, my writing is a blend. So there are aspects, like there are experiences certainly that I will infiltrate into my stories, or they might be a jumping off point or starting point, but most of it's all just imagination.
Yeah. How wonderful,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's really fun.
And
really,
do you think
really
that's maybe easier because you're so tapped into the visual art side as well? How might those kind of relate to each other and being able to?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Is that because I can see to paint, I can see to create a situation or a conflict. I think we all have those ideas, though, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're always thinking about things and reacting to things and feeling what we feel about the world, right? And what we go through. So I think we all have the potential to write stories. We might not believe it, and it might scare us, but I think we all do have the potential to write. And we do a lot of it in school, right? Certainly do a lot of it in school, and sometimes we stop when we leave school for various reasons, and I just didn't want to stop. So I came back to my story writing from being a youth, and have at age 65, written my first book. Mm-hmm.
And do you think it was the time in your life, work consumes so much of your time and family, that you had some breathing room after retirement to pursue art and writing? Yeah,
for sure. There's just way more time to do the things and the fun things that I love to do. And I think you're right. When you're working full time, I certainly did writing, but it was more like educational journaling, and it was nonfiction, right? So I was writing articles. I was actually a community editorial board member for The Record in Kitchener. Did that for a year. So wrote about anything that I wanted, about roundabouts and silly things, right? And it was fun. Like, it was fun, but it was not the kind of writing I wanted to do at the retirement part of my life.
Right.
So while I still write some creative nonfiction, I would say those are like memoir-like stories. This is where I'm putting most of my energy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. Does anyone from the audience have any questions they wanted to ask at this time? Yes.
I just want to know all your stories.
Yes.
They get you in there, but it's like at the end, it leaves me with more questions. So are you keeping the answers for your next novel?
No. Nice try. So might I write some stories that relate to some of these in this? Well, that's an interesting concept. No, I don't have that project in mind at this point, but that's kind of what short fiction does. It throws you into a moment or two in somebody's life, and then it takes you out. So you have a big responsibility as the reader, as the consumer of that story, to reflect upon where the story left off. So it's just like a little hint of somebody's life or a secret. These are all really flawed characters in these stories. Like they're all hitting their heads against the walls of their lives. And you as the reader need to figure out, well, did they change by the end, or are they still that stubborn person hitting their head against the wall with this issue? So I ask a lot of you as the consumer of the stories to bring something to the table when you're reading them and when you come to the conclusion. Here you go. I don't know if you're satisfied.
I don't know. I'll have to write my own ending.
Yes,
There you go.
Great
There you go.
exercise. Just with a little nod or shake, did anyone else find that they were full of questions after they read? Yeah, okay. A universal experience. So that met your intention then?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a question about writer's block, because I'm having a little bit of it. Do you think in any way it's related to the critic on your shoulder or the internal censor saying, you can't write that, that's not nice, you shouldn't, that sort of blocking voice?
Yes, and that is another reason that I write longhand, because I try to turn off that critic. When I'm writing longhand, I'm not going back and correcting. I think when I'm typing, I tend to go, oh, well, I can change that right now because I can see the mistake, right? And then I'm more editing and critiquing and not flowing, right? So I think how you get past that is you just keep writing. You just say, to heck with that critic on my shoulder. I'm going to put that critic over there in the cupboard and lock the cupboard so that they can't whisper in my ear anymore, and just write through it. And tell yourself that you can write about anything that you want. You need to write about what's important to you, and it doesn't matter what other people think. I didn't write this for everyone out there. I wrote this for me, first and foremost. And I'm thrilled that people are liking it and have given good input about the stories. Because you're the audience, right? I do want you to like it, and I want you to enjoy the stories, but at the same time, I didn't write it for you in the first place. Like I wasn't thinking, now Lorna would like me to write about this or this or this, or Florence wants me to never write about X, Y, Z, right? You can't do that, because that is immediately going to stifle your creativity and your voice, right? Your ability to talk about things that are difficult. There are some difficult stories to read in this collection. I'm not gonna tell you which ones I think are the most difficult. You have to figure that out for yourself. And it's a very personal decision, right? Somebody might relate to a story so deeply because they've shared that experience. That might be a very difficult story for them because it's a bit triggering maybe. Someone else will find a different story difficult to get through. And it's very personal. I don't know if that helped.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever had to, sort of going on that theme of writer's block, but have you ever had to, be sort of scheduled or set a time limit just to kind of get yourself back into the habit, or is that creativity sort of bubbling there for you a lot of the time?
Sometimes it bubbles more than at other times. So I found that when I'm concentrating on book promotion and I'm practicing the stories that I want to read, that type of thing, that's kind of the story that's in my head. Those 3 stories are consuming my attention. So it has been an adjustment this fall. I hadn't really experienced it to this length. I maybe had a few weeks of my brain being a bit dull, but I write every single morning. You should see, I have like all these things, all these books and I paint all, like I also draw and paint in the morning, so I kind of do this routine, right? And I eat breakfast, it's in a glass, so I just sip and I have my coffee and it's all good. And it's about an hour and a half that is devoted so that I can't say to myself at the end of the day I didn't write or paint, right? I did. Every single day I did something. It might be terrible, but I did it. So I guess that's how you push through, is you just have to face it, right? Yes.
Do you find it exhausting after I find creativity is exhausting. You're using your thoughts and your heart and your feelings and just everything is stirred up. And then do you have a nap after?
The napper in our family is my husband, John. He's a professional napper. He naps every single day. That was his goal in retirement. Poor guy's not even here to defend himself. It's hardly fair. No, I'll put that aside now. It's not a joking matter because it is a very honest question and I want to answer it honestly. Writing and creating is very exhausting. It's not exhausting like digging the weeds out of the garden. It's a different kind of exhausting. And sometimes I do give myself permission to take a rest or to just concentrate on my breathing, and if I fall asleep during it, it's fine. I'm not a big napper, but I really like a hammock in the summer. So sometimes if I've had a good writing session in the summer, like out on the porch with my device, if I'm transcribing maybe, then I might give myself permission after to rest on the hammock for half an hour or something like that. Because it's you're dealing with things that you're thinking about that are very important to you. Like you're working through something. The story, like I said, about the potatoes, right? The potato pancakes, that brings me right back to childhood. So, and I was an only child growing up. My mother had mental health issues, and she also had cancer when I was 7. So, like, there were times she wasn't in the kitchen, okay? There were times she was hospitalized in Hamilton in the psych unit. There were times she was at Princess Margaret Hospital undergoing treatment for cervical cancer. I couldn't visit. It was lonely. It was scary. I grieved her death many times. So to write about potato pancakes is a way into a story, right? To get you into that story. Because I'm telling you, the rest of that story is not so nice. It's pretty heavy, that one. Very heavy. But I get you into it with the flavors, right? I get you to the kitchen, and then I've got you. So yes, to answer your question, yeah, it's exhausting. It is exhausting. So yeah, just be good to yourself. If you need a nap, have a nap. If you don't need a nap, that's okay. Go for a walk. That's another great place to get ideas, is to go for a walk. And to get through the block, like you were asking before, and you were asking as well, Brandy. It's important to work through hitting your head against the wall when you've got creative block, or what, I hate that term, right? But it is a good term because we all know what it means. It means that it's just not coming the way it used to. And then we get scared that it may never come again, right? But it will. And we're leading up to a busy time of year, right? Or a time that's fraught with a lot of emotion. My mother died on Christmas Day. I have really tough memories about Christmas now. And we have all these wonderful children in our life, but it's a little tainted, right? It's just a little tainted. And it's been 16 years. It's still tainted. Still tough. And this is all being recorded. Any more questions?
Did you have another one?
No.
Anyone else?
I'm a little curious about, you write, a lot of it's very character driven, but it's coming from inside you, and you have this necessary relationship to the characters.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that when you're writing, that relationship begins and ends in your writing session, or do you have stories that linger with you that, like, you can have a thought, and there's a lot of thought and emotion wrapped up in it.
Right.
Is it resolved for you as an author at the end, or do you end up in the shower the next morning thinking like, oh, what about Kathy?
I do think about my stories a lot, and I do, I'm in my head a lot, and I think that's an only kid thing. You just have a lot of time on your own. So I do find myself in the shower, on walks, revisiting characters, but also thinking about new characters and things maybe that weren't resolved here, maybe I want to tweak over here, or look at it with a new lens. So it's a great question. Thank you for that. And I think too, at the end of the day, you're right, I have lived with these characters for a long time, and like them or hate them, they're my characters, right? They're my buddies, right? At the end of the day, I do want them to be okay. I want them to be resolved,
Yeah.
what you were asking about, right? So, great question. We're all great questions. Thank you. Jennifer, was your hand up again?
One more.
That's okay.
That's great.
We have time.
Absolutely.
Have you, as a child, when you were an only child, did you find yourself being a watcher and kind of at a distance from the groups that were in the playground or schoolyard or wherever, just observing a lot? And this was maybe something that was, even though you weren't writing about it for yourself, it was something that was inherent in your personality.
When you're an only child in a home like I grew up in, I certainly had a lot of adult time. And I was expected to, I think, to be a bit of a mini adult. So having said that, I had friends on the schoolyard, and what I liked best about being on the schoolyard was playing. But when you're small in stature like I was, you don't always get picked to play with the other club kids over here that are pretty good at athletics. So I was the kid who got the baseball bat across the eyes because I was standing too close. Or I was the kid who was literally the last one picked to play whatever it was. So I was a bit of a watcher, and I was a really big empathizer. I remember when my Ukrainian neighbor, you mentioned in the bio, Walter fell on the tarmac one day. He was a year older than, a year ahead of me in grade, so a year older, and he fell on the tarmac. He was having an appendicitis attack. But I didn't know that. I thought he was dead, right? Because again, you have to think about what I was going through at home, right? There was a lot of that kind of drama going on at home too. So I was like, I lost it. Like I was the screaming kid, like just a mess. So yeah, I was a bit of a watcher. And I think that's what I do in my writing too, is I sit over there and I set the stage of what's going on in that scene so that you're there too with me, right? Feeling what I think I want you to feel, or to feel what you bring to the experience that I'm building, that world I'm building, right? I don't know if I answered your questions. Great questions. Please bring them on.
I guess to build on that, my question was, do you think you were ever writing stories in your head, if you were sort of back and observing at times or in that adult world, maybe sometimes zoning out as a child, sitting amongst the adults, right? Like, were you writing stories in your head from a young age that may have kind of strengthened that or built that muscle?
I think so. My parents lived on this farm, right? And it was 10 acres, and we had a Volkswagen, and they would drive into the city, Toronto, right? So we lived around north of the Ford plant in Oakville area. And so they would drive on the new 401, and I always would like imagine that I was a princess and that all of the other drivers on the highway were looking in the car thinking, that's a lovely little whatever, like some kind of weirdness, right? So I was in my head imagining these weird, I think they were weird, these weird situations of me being not in my normal life. Mm-hmm. So I think that imagination, that building the muscle was happening really early on in a weird way. I remember going to see like a lot of the Eastern European families that my parents had lived with when they first lived in Toronto. And it was around the Hyde Park area. I remember like it wasn't too far off the highway, and then we would be, at these places visiting, and they always wanted me to be quiet, so they always gave me a lot of ice cream. Mm-hmm. And I would be licking the bowl, and these were people that didn't have kids, and then I think they were horrified, but I would just be licking the bowl and I was quiet. And then they could talk in their languages and in English, and it was quite interesting. And then I would eventually find myself under the table in the kitchen or wherever we were sitting, and then I would just be there for the length of the visit, whatever that was, probably hours, right? And then be back in the car imagining I was royalty.
So a lot of time. To sit
a lot
there
of
in your
time
head
to just
and, yes. Any other questions? I've got a couple more myself, but and feel free if you build on them. Yeah. Did you have another one?
I'm still thinking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can. It can be a very fluid conversation. Thinking more about some of the details, you alluded to a little bit about where you get some of your ideas, or that walking is a good way to process things. But do you have some specific things that yes, that's where my ideas come from, whether it's your background, your childhood, or are you always observing when you say you read a lot? And yeah.
I think like most people, I think about things that happen in the world quite a bit. So I write about things that interest me, that I want to learn more about. So sometimes there's research required. There's a story in this collection called The Domestic Life of a Picker. That title popped into my head one day when I was driving from Southampton to home, which is over there, near Walkerton. And I just had to write a story about a woman who goes into donation bins, and she needed to have 3 lovers that she lived with. And it's just a bizarre bit of a story, but it started with a title. Really weird. So it's really random where my ideas come from, but definitely walking helps. Definitely finding the sweet spot between being awake and asleep helps. So that's why napping on a hammock or wherever can actually be helpful, because there's that little moment just before you do this in your sleep when ideas kind of pop in, and if I don't write those down immediately, they're gone. I always say, oh, I'll remember that because it's such a great idea. Nope. Ideas are everywhere. Pia Chattopadhyay on CBC Radio used to have a show. I can't remember the name of it right now, but she would talk to interview different people about all kinds of bizarre things, and I used to get great ideas from that show. Oh no, honestly, like really, really wonderful. So I think we all need to be very open to exploring things that interest us. And if we want to write about them, well, great. Then write about them and explore them and see where they go, right? See if we can get them to go places that are uncomfortable. We need to write about things that are uncomfortable because there are other people thinking similar things that we are, and they want to find like-minded people's work to read. That's why there's so many different books out there, right? Have you ever wondered about that? Because we all have different ways of looking at the world. Some people look at things through the lens of exploring the space. I can't write that for the life of me. I just can't. I don't read it and I don't write it. I wish I could. I'd make $1 million, I'm sure. Or through the, I'm kidding, or through the lens of 50 Shades of Grey. Like, I read that and went, I read the first book. I forced myself to read it, and I just was like, this is not for me. But it's obviously for other people because the person made a lot of money and got movie rights. So that's what's so exciting about libraries and bookstores, right? There are things to read for all of us. And as writers, as a writer, I have a responsibility to delve deeply into whatever interests me at that moment. And for me, my genre is short fiction.
It's such a, it can be, I think not everyone is as comfortable reading short fiction. I'm not sure why. I think maybe because it kind of, those ideas or those difficult things, you have to deal with it kind of right away. You don't have a long sort of drawn out period of 100, 200 pages.
It's true. There's no build up. There's no build up. You're thrown into the scene really fast, and you're thrown out of it really fast.
Yeah.
But it's a moment in time that's shared with you and for you to consider as the reader, right? And as the writer as well. That's really what we're doing, is we're just looking at a scene or two and seeing if that person changes, and maybe they don't, and maybe they do, and maybe they should, and maybe they shouldn't, whatever the situation is. Jennifer, I'm going to put you on the spot for this. As an English teacher at the high school level, what do you have to say about the journey of students take exploring short fiction? Like, do we do a good job introducing students to short fiction?
Oh, so writing or reading it? Maybe
Either.
Both.
Okay. Both.
Okay. I find I taught many really powerful short stories. Alice Munro, An Ounce of Cure, from that short story collection. I know Raspberry Vinegar by Joan Fern Shaw was taught. Those are very visceral and powerful stories. And the students really seemed to connect with those. When they were writing on their own, even in grade 13, when we had grade 13 and I taught at Writer's Craft for 1 year, the writers, they were sure that their first draft was perfect. And I actually had students who would then rewrite and make it worse, as if as if they were faking their first draft because they thought whatever they put on paper was just right.
Right.
So there was this difficulty in saying, do you think you could work on this or tell more about this? And they didn't want to touch their perfect work. And that was a tricky, I got a lot of pushback about that because from the students, because they thought, it's just the way I want it.
Right.
And so their first draft was just right.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. I put you on the spot.
That's okay.
I didn't want to do that, but that insight is very powerful. I don't remember a lot of instruction around short stories. I remember maybe reading 2 or 3 or 4, maybe in grade 10, and that's about it. I don't know how the others' experiences went, but when I was critiquing for the record, I was like, I had never heard of this genre before. It was almost like that kind of experience. It's like when you read a really good author and they have 50 more books, and you're like, my life is now complete because I can read all of these other books because you just really connect with either the topic or the style of writing, or the genre, that type of thing. So that's how it is with me. I just love short fiction. I have 2 shelves of short fiction that I own and I borrow on a regular basis, as Mike knows.
Amazing, hey? There is a lot more out there than I think we realize as readers, right?
True.
There's
True.
something about the novel that's become just sort of the go-to for a lot of people for
It's true.
that. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
true. The nice thing about short fiction is you can read 1 or 2 in an evening, and then you can go and do something else. And you read maybe a couple more on the weekend, and you can kind of go through it slowly. And I've heard of other people who've read my collection in 2 nights. So it just depends on your reading style, right? Your curiosity. Yeah,
How much you love it.
How much you
Once
love it.
Get right through it, right?
it's true.
How do you select the names of the various characters in your stories?
Sometimes I think about how old the person is. So if a person's, let's say, in their 60s, I might have a certain name in mind that will kind of say that to you when you're reading the story. You'll know that. It's not a contemporary name, so it's not a younger person. There's a story in this collection, Something for Rain, R-A-I-N. Rain is a character. It's not the typical way that you spell rain when it's a name, but that's okay. It fits with the parents of that individual, and this is a younger person who has a sibling, Storm. Storm and Rain, and it fits with the story really well. So I really think carefully about the names. They're very important to me, and changing them willy-nilly is not my process. I sometimes like to change them because they're not quite right, so that I think about a lot of things. I consider many things when I'm choosing the right name, and it just feels right. Sometimes I want it to be a very different name than the other character that might be in the story. So it might be one person has a 1-syllable name and one has a 3 or 4-syllable name, more complicated name. I want it to be a name that's not, this is going to sound kind of weird, but not weirdly spelled. Like I want it to be a memorable name that you're going to hold on to. I hate when a writer introduces all this cast of characters and it's like 2.5 pages. And you wouldn't do that in short fiction, but I've read some things lately where I have so many characters in my head I can't hold on to the story because I'm trying to remember too many characters. And if I have to stop my reading to make too many notes, it's feeling like university again. Right?
Too much.
So, I don't know if that answers the question.
It
It's a
does,
great
yeah.
question.
At the same time, when you're thinking so much about the name and how that reflects your character, are you also really envisioning their physical appearance and sort of creating a whole, palette, I guess, of
Yes.
who they are?
Yeah, I really am. In the story I'm going to read next, you'll hear the name and it'll just make sense when you hear me kind of delve into what this individual is like and through his actions. So are we ready to maybe jump into that?
Absolutely.
All right. There we go. In honor of Miriam. The stink of rotten meat hits Walt as he steps from his Jeep into the 2-car garage. Miriam's goddamn fly traps. She blames Walt for the flies, saying that that's what he gets for leaving the garage door open. The type of trap Miriam sets is rudimentary in design and flawlessly effective. Chicken gizzards fill the base of a mason jar. Flies plunge headfirst through tiny slits in the lid. In the course of a week, a single female deposits 600 eggs, leaving maggots to seethe on the decomposing flesh. Mature flies then fritter away their lives, endlessly banging their heads against the lid. When he enters the kitchen, Walt calls out Miriam's name like he always does, his flinty voice echoing off the cathedral ceiling. And, like he does every other trip into town, he climbs the stairs and stands in the doorway of her studio. He loves to watch her work. Only Miriam isn't there. If she were, she would be smearing adhesive onto a life-size clay sculpture. She'd be attaching found objects such as hieroglyphics, musical score, and postage stamps to form a story about the woman who had commissioned the work. Always the upper body, chest, breasts, abdomen. Yet each sculpture made unique by the woman's individual body type, breast shape and size, and selected adornments. The pungent odor of glue and paint rides the studio air, despite Miriam's absence. With his big toe, Walt nudges the stool where she used to sit, remembering how he would stand behind her and lift a tangle of hair from her shoulders as she manipulated clay. How, when he stooped to plant a kiss, a hint of vanilla-scented body spray would mix with her natural musty smell, a scent that caused him to sigh with regret. Walt has been to the doctor twice since Miriam's funeral. The complaint is an old one, that he can't sleep. The doctor cautioned Walt to ease off caffeine and avoid exercising at night. She said, "You need to get on with your life. There's such a thing as grieving too long." "You make it sound easy." Walt's trembling hands did a worry dance in front of his chest. "Did I mention this already? No more naps." "That's the worst thing you can do. I'll start you on a light sleeping medication to help you over the hump." She scribbled something illegible on a prescription pad. Walt keeps some things from the doctor. That he hears Miriam's voice. That he sees her standing on the concession road when he goes to fetch the mail. Walt worries that if he mentions any of this, the doctor will diagnose him with something worse than grief. Yet, even with the support of sleeping medication, instead of feeling well rested, Walt feels groggy with the memory of nightmares that drag on into the next day. For the first time in his life, he dreads the night and going to bed. Cut flowers, now discolored in their glass vases, line the dresser where he and Miriam kept their intimates. Her word, not his. He doesn't have the strength to toss the flowers out, nor can he face the stack of sympathy cards on the windowsill. All those people at the funeral home, the line snaking through the foyer, past the video loop of Miriam's life, all those people hugging him, patting him on the shoulder, their faces making it clear they didn't believe Miriam is gone. So sudden, so unexpected, blah, 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 blah. All that sympathy, yet not one person has rushed to his side, not a single one. That's where I'm going to stop.
Thank you for that, Cindy.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions or comments? from the audience before we
Before
wrap
we
things
wrap
up.
up.
Yeah, unless you have anything else you wanted to share.
No, just to let people know that if they want to purchase a copy today, that the book retails for $18.95 plus book tax, which brings it up to $20. And I will sign your copy if you so desire. And we also have bookmarks. And thank you for coming. And thank you to the library for being such gracious hosts and advertising. Thank you.
Thank
very
you
much.
so much for choosing us as a location. We're really happy
great.
to host and so
Thank
glad
you.
to see people here
Yes.
and to dive into talking about literature and writing and art and
Right on.
all of those great things that we love to celebrate here. So
Aw,
thank you
that's
so
great.
much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.